Good afternoon. I'll be talking about the adverse drug reactions which go hand in hand with treatment for MDR TB. And before we start, it is always vital to have a frank discussion with the patient before you initiate anti-tubercular treatment. Why? Because more often than not, there are adverse drug reactions which will go along with these, and the patient who you are treating is likely to blame you if you do not advise them beforehand that there is a possibility of these happening. That is number one. Second thing is that both you, the treating clinician, and the patient should be on the same page regarding their expectations and what they expect from the treatment. Okay, so these are the most common adverse drug reactions which you would expect with anti-tubercular treatment. So the GI related ones: nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, anorexia, gastritis. Then the CNS related ones: peripheral neuropathy, dizziness, vertigo, vestibular toxicity, headache, visual disturbances, seizures. And the other ones like depression, suicidal ideation, electrolyte disturbances, QT prolongations, rash. Okay, and there are other minor ones. So the most common culprit for anorexia, nausea, abdominal pains is rifampicin. Joint pain is attributed to pyrazinamide. Then there is paresthesia and burning in feet, which is caused by isoniazid, and the rifampicin, which causes orange or red color urine, which is also used as a measure of compliance. Then skin itching, rash, deafness, dizziness, jaundice, vomiting, visual impairment, and rarely generalized purpura, shock. Okay. Now, close monitoring is necessary to ensure that the adverse effects of the drugs are recognized quickly, and the treatment supporter, that is whoever the patient is following up with, should be trained to screen patients regularly for symptoms. And like we discussed before, before starting the treatment, the patient should be instructed in detail about the potential adverse effects. And this is a universal trend throughout, that depending on the severity of the adverse drug reaction, there are two choices. If the adverse drug reaction is mild and not serious, you could either change the timing, adjust the dosage of the drugs, of the offending drugs, and otherwise, if in spite of doing all this, suppose the adverse drug reactions are serious enough to warrant it, then you will have to change the regimen you are giving to the patient. Okay, right. So this is these are the which are supposed to be monitored regularly in a patient receiving treatment for MDR-TB. So we begin with your liver function test every 6 months, especially if the patient is receiving ethionamide, protonamide for extended periods. And for HIV infected patients, monthly monitoring for patients on bedaquiline, and gradually you can reduce the frequency at which you are checking the LFTs. Then HIV testing, CBC, especially if the patient is receiving linezolid, which causes myelosuppression. Okay. Then amylase, lipase, serum proteins, albumin, globulin, okay, indicated for a workup for abdominal pain to rule out pancreatitis in patients on linezolid, bedaquiline, delanamide, and lactic acid especially if the patient is on linezolid or ART. Then serum glucose monitoring. Before starting the MDR-TB regimen, it is usually better to work up the patient for diabetes. But if the patient is receiving catifloxacin, then monitor the FBS at baseline and monitor monthly. And you have to educate the patient regarding the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia and warn them to tell the people around them that they are prone to something like this, so that suppose they do collapse somewhere, there are people around them who are aware of this condition and they are not just carried off that they are a public drunk or something like that. Okay, that is one. Then audiometry, especially in elderly patients receiving streptomycin. Then vision tests for long-term ethambutol or linezolid, and ideally there should be a baseline visual acuity test, then color vision test, and you can repeat the test if you are suspecting that there is any visual disturbance which has set in. Then educational, mental health and social consultation should be given as appropriate. Okay, right. So now we'll be going into each of these adverse drug reactions one by one, and the most common causes and what our options are while dealing with them. So we'll start with the most common ones, rash, allergic reaction, and very rarely anaphylaxis, Stevens-Johnson syndrome. But for minor reactions, various drugs like antihistamines, hydrocortisone cream for localized rash, and prednisolone in low dose. Dry skin, especially in elderly people, patients with CKD, they have got dry xerosis of the skin, so moisturizing. And once the rash resolves, then you can introduce the remaining drugs one at a time with the ones which are most likely to cause reaction to be given last. And order of reintroduction ideally should be isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, ethionamide, cycloserine, ethambutol, PAS, fluoroquinolone, and kanamycin. And so you can consider not reintroducing, even as a challenge, any drug that is highly likely to cause any serious life-threatening reaction. And for serious allergic reaction, it is important to stop all therapies and refer the patient to a higher center. So what are the serious reactions? Things like Stevens-Johnson syndrome, something which would compromise the hemodynamic status of the patient. Okay, so this is just petechia and purpurine. Okay, then GI symptoms. The most common culprits are ethionamide, protonamide, PAS, pyrazinamide, ethambutol, and bedaquiline. So what do? You assess the patient for dehydration. Look at the patient clinically. Check out the lab parameters. Then adjust the medications without lowering the overall dose. How? You can give ethionamide, protonamide at night, or you can split up the dosing to twice or thrice daily with light snacks in between the medications, and you can give PAS 2 hours before any other anti-TB drugs, antiemetics like metoclopramide and ondansetron, and if there is absolutely no other choice, then you can decrease the dose of the suspected drug, and very rarely you may need to suspend that drug altogether. Okay, so like we had said before, step 1 is adjust the medication, step 2 is antiemetics, metoclopramide, ondansetron, and you have to be aware of the extrapyramidal side effects which sometimes happen with prokinetic drugs like metoclopramide, but those are rare, but you should be aware of them. Then final option is to decrease the dose, and when nothing else works, you have to suspend the drug and adjust your regimen accordingly. Right. Then diarrhea, flatulence. Okay. Now there is the side effect of the TB drugs, and there is the way the patient perceives the side effects. So it is up to us as clinicians to go up to the patient and ask them to what degree are they inconvenienced by it, and if possible you can counsel them to tolerate some degree of the discomfort, encourage fluid intake, and you can treat uncomplicated diarrhea with loperamide. And if the diarrhea is persistent, then you have to check the serum electrolytes, urine output, renal functions. And suppose there are other serious indicators like fever and diarrhea mixed with blood, then you have to consider that there may be other causes which may be resulting in that diarrhea. Okay, like especially if the patient has been routinely in healthcare environment, pseudomembranous colitis, parasitic infections, and finally lactose intolerance. Right. Now hepatitis. Hepatitis can occur with pyrazimamide, isoniazid, rifampicin, prothionamide, ethionamide, fluoroquinolones, and bedaquiline. So suppose the patient is very sick, that is sputum is 3+ positive, then you have to give the antitubercular drugs. And when the patient is not so sick, then you can wait for introduction of antitubercular drugs once the enzyme levels are normal. So suppose the enzyme levels are more than 5 times that of normal, then you stop all hepatotoxic drugs and then you continue with a 3-drug regimen. So typically that would be something like levoflox, ethambutol, streptomycin, and you stop all the other drugs, and you have to eliminate other potential causes of hepatotoxicity, including viral, alcohol, and surreptitious drug abuse. And after that you introduce the drugs one at a time with the least hepatotoxic agents first, and monitor the liver functions by testing the liver enzymes every 3 to 5 days. So typically you reintroduce, you start it with isoniazid, then eventually rifampicin, and so on and so forth. Now giddiness, we would just like to add over here that many elderly patients have got non-specific giddiness even before antitubercular drugs are started. So patient has to be counseled, and it is up to us as clinicians to delineate to what extent is the drug causing the giddiness and to what extent it is hampering the patient. So the patient has to be counseled. Then if it is very severe, if the patient is at risk of fall and head injury especially, then you may have to stop the antitubercular drugs and administer them individually. You can adjust the dosage, and if there is absolutely no other option, then terminate the offending drugs. Then aminoglycosides, especially in elderly, cause vestibular toxicity, and if there is severe persistent giddiness, then the patient should be referred to a neurologist. Right. Then hematological abnormalities, there may be myelosuppression, which is especially attributed to linezolid. So what are our options for dealing with it? You can start the linezolid at a lower dose, 300 milligram instead of 600 milligram, and that is if that linezolid is absolutely essential to the regimen. If it is not, then you can suspend linezolid altogether. Then you have to consider other non-drug related causes for this myelosuppression, and typically if the hemoglobin is less than 7 or 6, then you have to consider blood transfusion. Now peripheral neuropathy, the most common culprits are cycloserine, linezolid, isoniazid, streptomycin, amikacin, capreomycin, fluoroquinolones, ethambutol, and rarely prothionamide, ethionamide. So pyridoxine is necessary to reduce symptoms, and if there is no improvement despite pyridoxine, then you can introduce amitriptyline, and the correction of other nutritional and vitamin deficiencies, and increasing pyridoxine dose to the maximum dose of 200 mg per day. You can consider reducing the dose of cycloserine. Cycloserine is a drug with a whole host of CNS side effects, including psychosis, seizures. Okay, when any of these, including peripheral neuropathy, happens, you have to consider adjusting the dose of cycloserine. NSAIDs or acetaminophen can alleviate the symptoms, but then again you have to pay attention to the liver and renal functions of the patient. And patients with comorbid disease, especially diabetes, HIV, alcohol dependence, will be more likely to develop peripheral neuropathy. And neuropathy associated with linezolid is common after prolonged use, and it may be permanent and irreversible. Okay. Now, headache. Headache usually attributed to bedaquiline, cycloserine, and headache is usually self-limited. You have to always rule out other more serious causes of headache and not just write it up to antitubercular drugs, including meningitis and other infections of the central nervous system. Especially it is up to you to suspect whether the patient has developed new tuberculomas and is developing raised intracranial hypertension while the AKT is ongoing. So, to minimize headaches, the cycloserine can be started at lower doses and gradually increased over 1 to 2 weeks to achieve the target dose. NSAIDs, analgesics like ibuprofen and paracetamol are an option. Encourage the patient to have good hydration, and low dose tricyclic antidepressants, amitriptyline, can be used, and pyridoxine should be given to all patients receiving cycloserine to help prevent neurotoxicity. Now, again, depression may occur with other socio-economic and other circumstances, chronic disease, and cycloserine, fluoroquinolones, isoniazid, etc. So there may be other issues like substance abuse involved. So patient requires counseling. The drug of choice is either tricyclic antidepressants or SSRIs, and lower the dose of the suspected agent, and if there is no other choice, then you may have to discontinue. Okay, this is especially true with cycloserine. Then psychotic symptoms. Then again, cycloserine, fluoroquinolones, isoniazid. So you may stop the suspected agent for 1 to 4 weeks, and if moderate to severe symptoms persist, then haloperidol may be used. Pyridoxine should always be included. And suppose the patient is at risk to himself or herself, that is, the patient expresses suicidal ideation, then you have to ideally hospitalize the patient in a psychiatric ward. Then again, lower the dose of the suspected agent and stop it if there is no other choice. And once the symptoms have resolved of psychotic behavior, then you can consider tapering it and stopping it. Okay, right. Now seizures may be attributable to, again, cycloserine, fluoroquinolones, isoniazid. Anticonvulsant therapy, typically with phenytoin, valproic acid, carbamazepine, levetiracetam. Then you can increase the pyridoxine dose to a maximum of 200 mg per day. Pay close attention to the serum electrolytes, calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, and when seizures have resolved, you may eventually restart the medications one at a time, but cycloserine should not be restarted in a patient who has had seizures attributable to cycloserine. Then tendinitis and tendon rupture, usually with fluoroquinolones. So you have to consider stopping the fluoroquinolones if there is significant inflammation. Then NSAIDs like ibuprofen can be used to reduce the inflammation, rest the joint, and if necessary splint the joint. Then what to do about the fluoroquinolones? Again, reduce the dose, and if there is no other option, then you may have to discontinue fluoroquinolones. Then nephrotoxicity attributable to aminoglycosides, streptomycin, kanamycin, amikacin and capreomycin. What do? You discontinue the suspected agent. You can consider using capreomycin as an alternative, and you have to rule out other causes for nephrotoxicity, including NSAID abuse, diabetes, other medications, congestive heart failure and obstructive uropathy. You have to follow the creatinine doses, the creatinine levels closely, including the urine output, the hydration status of the patient, especially if the patient is elderly. You may require a central line to measure the central venous pressure, and you can reduce the dose of the injectable aminoglycoside like streptomycin to 2 to 3 times a week and titrate it as per the creatinine clearance level. Then vestibular toxicity attributed to streptomycin, kanamycin, and especially in elderly patient, again our option is to change the dosing of streptomycin to 2 to 3 times a week, and you can change the aminoglycoside to capreomycin. And if the tinnitus and unsteadiness worsen despite the treatment, you may have to stop the injectable agents. Then hearing loss, again vestibular toxicity attributable to streptomycin, kanamycin. So ideally you should have an audiogram documenting the hearing level before initiation of AKT and the extent to which hearing is affected after initiating AKT. Then again you have to change the dosage like before, streptomycin 2 to 3 times a week, considering substitute streptomycin with capreomycin, and you may have to discontinue the aminoglycoside if there is no other option. And electrolyte disturbances can occur with streptomycin, kanamycin, amikacin, capreomycin. You have to evaluate the sodium, potassium, bicarb, calcium levels and replace the electrolytes as needed. And in very severe cases, especially if there is hyponatremia with altered sensorium or hypokalemia with flaccidity, and in those cases especially you have to advise admission. Okay. Then QT prolongation, especially true with bedaquiline, delanimide and fluoroquinolones, clofazimine, clarithromycin. So any patient who is found to have a QTc value greater than 500 milliseconds, you have to stop all the QT prolonging drugs, check the serum electrolytes, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and you have to go over the patient's medication and find out if the patient is taking any other drugs which might contribute to this effect. And if there is no other option, then you may have to suspend the fluoroquinolones, especially if the risk of torsades is higher. Then gynecomastia can occur with ethionamide, propanamide, and especially true in alcoholic patients who have been taking spironolactone for quite some time. So they might encounter gynecomastia, and you have to, usually there is nothing active to be done. You have to encourage the patient to tolerate the side effects. Alopecia may occur with isoniazid, ethionamide, prothionamide, it is usually temporary and not progressive. You have to again reassure and encourage the patient. And lactic acidosis may occur with linezolid. You may have to stop the dosage of linezolid and serially monitor the ABGs and lactate levels. Optic neuritis, this is why you need to have a visual acuity and Snellen's test before initiating the antitubercular treatment and after, when the patient complains of any visual disturbances. Then what do? You stop ethionamide, you stop ethambutol and linezolid and do not restart it usually. And you have to examine the fundus of the patient to rule out if there is any other concomitant comorbidity like proliferative diabetic retinopathy, control the diabetes, and you may have to refer the patient to ophthalmologist. Then there may be a persistent metallic taste can occur with fluoroquinolones and ethionamide. So there is nothing much you have to do. Encourage the patient and reassure the patient. Then superficial fungal infections can occur with fluoroquinolones, and the treatment of choice is topical antifungal drugs, and you have to exclude other diseases such as HIV. And dysglycemia, hyperglycemia, deranged blood sugars may be a problem with gatifloxacin and ethionamide, prothionamide. You have to replace the offending drugs and treat the diabetes as necessary. Hypothyroidism, you have to monitor the thyroid function test in patients receiving PAS and ethionamide, and it is usually completely reversible. Arthralgia can occur with pyrazinamide, fluoroquinolones, bedaquiline. You treat it initially with paracetamol, then eventually with other NSAIDs, and again you may have to lower the dosage or discontinue it altogether depending on to what extent this arthralgia is inconveniencing the patient. Or then finally suicidal ideation. Again we come back to cycloserine with all its CNS side effects. Isoniazid, ethionamide, prothionamide. What do? You hospitalize the patient, especially the patients who have active suicidal ideation, and you discontinue cycloserine. Then you request a psychiatric consultation and initiate antidepressant therapy, and eventually you may need to lower the dose of ethionamide, prothionamide to 500 mg daily until the patient is stable. So now this is just a summary of the drugs which can be used for the various side effects. So for nausea, vomiting, etc., metoclopramide, then antacids, H2 blockers, PPIs, oral candidiasis, fluconazole, then there is diarrhea, loperamide, and so on and so forth. Okay, thank you.